capacity to implore the legislature to support and fund our public schools. This was an important step towards advancing an agenda that would help Florida's public schools to retain and recruit educators in a state that continues to have a massive teacher shortage. The agenda was truly about student success and ensuring that all students had what they needed to achieve the highest levels of academic attainment for every student, and of course, school funding that is sorely needed throughout the state. So fast forward 3 months, on March 13th, our schools received the governor's recommended order to close their doors. Little did we know at the time, they would remain closed for the duration of the school year. While most schools were in spring break or preparing for it, our education support professionals went into superhero mode. Breakfast and lunch programs throughout the state never stopped. Food service workers, custodians, paraprofessionals, maintenance workers, and others went into communities, opened cafeterias, and set up food stations to bring much needed food to students in our most challenged communities. And our teachers did the unthinkable. They were asked to reorganize, to rethink, to refocus, and create a 100% virtual world of teaching through remote education, distance learning, and virtual schooling for our students. Kudos and much respect to our teachers, but this is not virtual education in its truest form. What we did was crisis management. A colleague of mine coined the phrase pandemic pedagogy. And while online education has a place in our new normal, I would caution us that nothing replaces the in-person teaching and learning that happens between a teacher and a student. And this brings us to today and this very important work. Last week, most of our school districts ended their 2020 school year. And this week, in fact, on Friday, will end the school year for all students in the state of Florida. It is almost antithetical to think that we have convened a statewide task force to safely reopen Florida's public schools at the end of the subsequent school year. But given the backdrop of coronavirus or COVID-19, a pandemic that has ravaged the world, and in our state, as of today, we have over 57,000 cases of the virus, and sadly, 2,530 deaths. That coupled with our nation on the edge because of social unrest in our nation, but more importantly, the impacts of that unrest being felt here in our great state from Escambia County to the Keys. Both these issues against a time clock of 70 days, less than 3 months before the first Florida students are slated to go back into our public schools. This work is more important than ever. This task force was convened to reflect a diverse stakeholder support of our public schools and garner a wide range of diverse opinions to come up with a set of guidelines and suggestions, ideas, and frankly, some concerns that would serve as the floor for conversations and decisions to be made locally. Now, this is not an end-all, tell-all, be-all slate of ideas or guidelines. This serves as a conversation. This task force was represented by teachers, education support professionals, school board members, lawmakers, clergy, civic and social organizations, parents, students, and business owners. Robust conversations were had about what is appropriate for our safe return to campuses and the new school year. And the work centered around 5 big ideas: public health and safety, student success, social and emotional well-being, safe working, learning conditions, and of course, investment in our public schools. Today, you'll hear from 2 committee chairs and 2 members of the task force. Carol Cleaver, a teacher from Escambia County and committee chair for student success, Mr. David Richardson, Miami Beach City Commissioner and committee chair for investment in our public schools, Johanna Lopez, executive director of Voces Unidos and a Orlando County school board member, and Pat Barber, president of the Manatee Education Association, and also a committee member for investment in our schools. I want to thank the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association for providing domestic and international guidance, and also the public input from stakeholders from around the state who asked questions, who sent emails, and offered concerns for moving forward. I also want to thank Carol Goronskis, who led an internal task force of our members, who offered suggestions and ideas and did some pre-work to set a predicate for where we need to go. And also, I want to acknowledge our Vice President, Andrew Spar, who also helped to co-chair our internal task force. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to, again, Escambia County teacher, Mrs. Carol Cleaver.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you again. It was my privilege to serve on this committee because I love my job and I love Florida students. So I'm happy to have an opportunity to do anything to help them. During this pandemic, students and educators had our worlds turned upside down. Through the end of the school year, teachers made a valiant effort to continue academic instruction in as consistent of a way possible. But we must be honest that performing under these types of stresses and circumstances does not allow for the high quality education or the face-to-face relationships that Florida students deserve. We must further acknowledge the likelihood of interruptions and contingencies in the school year to come, and therefore we must make every effort to protect the instructional time that we do get to have with our students. The focus needs to be on achieving academic progress. Determining a student's ability to perform on a standardized test or school improvement percentages should not be our concern when we are endeavoring to make up for lost time from the end of our last school year and remain adaptable to events beyond our control in the year to come. School testing and evaluations should not be conducted in the 2020-2021 school year. I urge you also to remember that while the school year calendars and curriculum platforms may be determined by administrators and legislators, it is the teachers and education staff professionals themselves that ultimately do the work of educating our children. Including classroom educators on planning committees is a necessary step towards securing investment and dedication from the professionals that must put these plans into action and with whom we are trusting the care of our children. Please capitalize on our experience, input, and concern for Florida's children by bringing us to the planning table. I want to thank the Florida Education Association for putting together this task force and inviting so many different people that all have one important thing in common. We care about kids, and I hope that everybody will look at the hard work that we've done over the last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cleaver. We appreciate your efforts. Next, we will hear from Miami Beach City Commissioner David Richardson.
Thank you, President Ingram. I appreciate the opportunity to participate, not only in my current function as a city commissioner, but as a former state legislator who is very active in the appropriations process. We know that there are many health and infrastructure needs in public schools related to the crisis caused by the COVID-19. And we recognize that none of these needs can be accomplished without adequate state and federal funding. We know that there is a significant allocation coming from the federal government, $770 million, and another allocation for the governor's discretionary fund. We feel very strongly that the legislature should come into special session to determine the best spending for these federal dollars rather than leave these decisions under emergency powers. So we feel strongly that the legislature should be heard on how to best allocate these funds. One thing that this crisis has shown us is the need for high-speed access and modern technology. And it's essential that all students, regardless of their socioeconomic level, be provided with the same level of access so that we can continue this distant learning and any other forms of new instructional access that we're seeing because of the crisis. We feel very strongly that we need to maintain full funding on mental health and school safety as we move through the crisis. And we know that we must be flexible to make changes because what we don't know today, we may know tomorrow. And we feel strongly that this investment is crucial to the overall economic recovery in Florida. And with that, I would just turn it back to you, President Ingram, and say thank you for allowing me to participate. I appreciate that you've brought this panel together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Commissioner, and thank you for your long years of service in the Florida legislature. We appreciate your service. Next, we will hear from Johanna Lopez, Executive Director of Voces Unidos.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. We are facing challenging times in Florida, and the Department of Education has to guarantee a high-quality education for all of our children. Equity for all of our students is what we're asking for. Our diverse community, especially our students of color and low-income students, deserve to have technological devices like computers or iPads. We also have to be focused on safety and on the increment of mental health initiatives for every student. Remember, every student is important for us, and none of them can be left behind. All of our students deserve high expectations every day, but also accommodations if needed. To Governor DeSantis, Commissioner of Education, Mr. Corcoran, and to legislators in Florida, please don't forget about our English language learners. Don't forget about our exceptional students' education. Which programs are you going to offer to our ESC students who couldn't get any education during distance learning? They need help, and I know that you have them in your mind. We also have to think about our working families that are struggling to survive during this pandemic, who also need support to help their children to succeed academically. We have thousands of Latinx and Haitian families in Florida that are not receiving any type of training to help their children in their native language. They deserve to be engaged with our schools in any platform that we will be offering. The Department of Education website needs to be more inclusive as well. Our families are feeling lost. Imagine our children. Thank you for listening. I hope to see changes for our community needs when they return to school. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Lopez, for your very impassioned thoughts. Next, we will hear from Mrs. Pat Barber, President of the Manatee Education Association.
Thank you, President Ingram. I want to thank everybody for this opportunity. The recommendations we're bringing forward were put together by a diverse group of people who care about the students in public education in Florida. We're facing many pressures in public education. We have to look at what we learned after our experience since March 13th, and then look forward to what to do when we reopen our schools. There are extreme pressures on public schools to keep students, teachers, and other employees safe while delivering an education plan that will help all students move forward when we come back in the fall. These recommendations are a template that will allow school districts, school board members, teachers, and employees in school districts to have some kind of a guideline to follow and build upon for reopening schools, making health and safety and student success and an investment in public education a priority. We have 2.8 million students in our public schools. There are 4,500 public schools. All of those students have diverse needs, and all of those schools are different. So what we hope this will provide is a template that will help schools with a starting place, because every single school district will be going through this very same process. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we will turn it over to our moderator, Sharon Nesbitt, for any questions from any reporters from around the state.
Please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question, or dial *9 if you're listening by phone.
Bobby Calvan.
Yes, sir.
Unmuting myself. Hi, I'm Bobby Calvan with the Associated Press. Mr. Ingram, I'm wondering if you can be a bit more specific. I mean, I was looking through the your proposals, and they are filled with a lot of generalities, but I'm wondering if you can flesh out some of them. What you mean by hybrid delivery and staggered schedules, and also what might we see on a school bus or on campus during a day? Are we talking about year-round, for example?
Sure. So let me just elaborate on the generalities. What we wanted to do was provide a floor for our recommendations and our guidelines, not a ceiling. We believe, and we also frankly know that our parents want to be involved at the local level. And so Tallahassee, any group that is doing something statewide should provide a broad set of responses so that our superintendents, so that our principals, so that our teacher leaders, who our school board members who are local on the local level can decide how districts will move going forward. But let me just elaborate on some of the things that you brought up, and it really comes from ensuring student success, which for me, and these are in no particular order, is always job one for us. A hybrid version of education would mean it would take many different forms. That would mean that some students would go to school in our physical plants or brick and mortar schools, while other schools are home. In terms of the busing, we have to adhere to social distancing, and that may mean buying more buses. That may mean employing more bus drivers. It has been recommended by CDC that we do something different with lunchtime situations in our public schools, and that may mean bringing food to the classrooms as it relates to students going or traveling throughout the school. It has also been recommended from CDC guidelines that teachers move throughout classes and not students move throughout classes. Now, all of these are going to be different, and you're going to have different ways of going at getting this right. And so what we didn't want to do was bottle a district into one corner and say, you must do this, because there are going to be many different ways to getting it right. We can adhere to social distancing. We can ensure the health and safety of those who are caring for our children, and we can also ensure the health and safety of our kids. We have to put our heads together. We have to keep the decisions local. And we have to make sure that we involve the voices from everybody. What we wanted to simply do was say there's a different way to do this. Our governor and our commissioner, unfortunately, have a task force on education that is made up predominantly of business people. People who are not close to the classroom, people who know very little about education. That is not how you get your answers. Your answers are going to come from the school system itself.
Susan Giles.
Hi, I'm with WUSF in Tampa. I have a question. Ms. Johanna Lopez did address the needs of English language learners and ESE students, and I know that it was almost impossible to provide to meet the needs over this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, to meet the needs of such students during this distance learning time, if there is a hybrid sort of education, how can those needs be met and the laws be followed with regard to those students and their needs?
Ms. Lopez, do you want to start, and then I will follow up?
Sure. Thank you for your question. I believe that at a local level, we're making a lot of arrangement. For example, in Orange County Public Schools, we're providing trainings from the multilingual department for all the teachers based on ELL accommodations, English language learners accommodations. So we are doing the same thing with exceptional students. So I believe that at state level, we should do the same thing by providing trainings for all the teachers to accommodate and be more flexible with this community, with the ESOL and with the ESC and ELL, so they can be more successful in the classroom. I think that we are not sure what type of education we're going to have in the new school year. If it is a blended education, long distance, traditional, so we're not clear on that. But I think that we have to be focused on that because our students, those groups are struggling a lot. And we even have ESC students that did not receive any type of education. We have to create some type of programs and initiatives to be more flexible with the parents, with the working parents and the students as well.
Thank you very much. And I will simply say that our state needs more dual language immersion. We simply need to put things and try trilingual immersion, because we have Haitian Creole students in very high numbers throughout the state. We also have, so it's as simple as putting directions in native language. It's as simple as if you give out something that is a requirement or a course requirement, give it out in the native language. And sometimes from the State Department, we are not doing that. And so we need to ensure that we are inclusive to every student as we move forward throughout the pedagogy, the public policy, and the curriculum itself. We need to make sure that we are inclusive of every single student. And that is how we're going to do that, as well as the digital platforms as well. And if we have a blended or remote learning process, then we need to contract with people who are going to do the dual or trilingual language immersion as well. Because, it makes no sense if you can't read something that is digital and the school system has bought that without the dual language immersion.
Next up, we have Jessica Bateman.
Hello.
Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Hi, so I have two questions. The first one is I was wondering if Fed could sort of explain the rationale behind the recommendation to suspend accountability, including testing, school grades, et cetera. And just after having done reporting on this for many years, I kind of have a sense of where people stand. And I can imagine, your critics are people on the other side of these issues saying, well, teachers unions have long been critical of the accountability system. And so maybe this is, kind of a opportunistic time to say, get rid of it.
Sure, and thank you for the question. I appreciate that. We expect some high level of academic regression. We normally attune this to the summer slide. Well, we have students that would have been out of school, out of their physical classrooms for about 6 months. And like Johanna said, some of these kids have a digital divide. Some of them have a linguistic divide. And so we know that there's going to be some catch up necessary. The only way that we can catch our students up is time to teach. It's time on task, is that teacher and student cultivating that relationship so that we can move them forward, so that we have time to isolate the problems, identify those problems, and fix whatever regression that our students have had. We can't do that with the pressures of a test. We can't do that with the pressures of a school grade. We should not be condemned to failure because we're racing against a clock to set benchmarks so that students have to pass a test that we suspended this year. We suspended this year and life goes on. We suspended this year and our students are still going to college. We suspended this and our students are still graduating this year, and they will be better for it because they don't have the pressures of the test. They don't have an accountability system that we have long said has very faulty measures in measuring our students and measuring our teachers and exactly what we're trying to do. Are we trying to test students out of school, or are we trying to teach them to stay in school and that education truly matters? And so I would tell you that this is not an opportunistic time. This is teachers calling on the legislature to say, let us teach. Give us the time to get these students where they need to be, because there's going to be some level of slide. There's going to be some level of backtracking for academics because we have not seen them for 3 months. And that takes a toll on the academic prowess of a student. And so that's simply what we're calling for. Release the pressures of a school grade. Release the pressures of money being tied to a test. Release the pressures of a teacher's evaluation being tied to a test. And give us the time to do what we know how to do. And that is push our students, insist that they have the highest level of academic achievement that they can possibly have. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yep. My second question is just related to the recommendation to suspend fire drills and active shooter drills, which I understand is for, out of concerns of students or staff members being grouped together too closely. But I'm wondering if by suspending those, you're potentially putting students or school staff at risk for other safety concerns, regardless of the pandemic.
Sure, and I will separate or bifurcate the fire drills from the active shooter drills. Fire drills are absolutely necessary in our schools. They have been in our schools for a really long time. We just have to find a safe way to do that. And I don't think that it's impossible to do that. I think that we have to work with our fire marshals. I think we have to work with our fire departments locally. I don't think we should have a state system that says we do it like this, because all of our schools from rural to urban are going to be different. And so if you believe that a school that has 100 students is going to be the same that has 6,000 students, then frankly, you have never been in a school before. And so I will tell you that we need to ensure that we can still do fire drills in some manner. The active shooter drills have come with great uncertainty for all of us. And we certainly want to keep our students safe, but there's a way to do that. Our students have been traumatized in many instances from these active shooter drills. Having first and second graders roll under their chairs or get onto a wall or figure out how to escape from a room. That does something mentally and physically to a student. And so we believe that there's a better way to do that. We don't have all of the answers here today. Again, this is set as a benchmark for us to start the conversation and to decide on a local level. We have teacher leaders who are union leaders, and we have superintendents who are at the ready to discuss all of these ideas. And we need to put them on the table so that we come up with an answer for every single school district.
Anna Ceballos, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Anna Ceballos with the News Service of Florida. I had a few questions regarding the recommendation for increasing the number of social workers, school psychologists, and counselors. You mentioned that these recommendations are meant to provide a floor, not a ceiling, but I'm wondering if statewide there is, a floor for the number of staff that you're recommending are added, and if you could provide some examples of why these positions would be needed as we get back to school.
So the first thing that we would recommend is that all of our counselors be released to do the job that they can do. We have counselors, we have school counselors that are certainly ready and willing to do the job that they signed up to do. But in far too many cases, our counselors, their time is hijacked by testing or proctoring or doing some kind of administrative kind of work in our public schools. And so if we did that, then there is a ratio, which I'm gonna defer to our Vice President, Andrew Spar, for the ratios of our counselors to students in high school and middle school and elementary school. And then mental health counseling. Let me just say this. Our students, I believe my parents would just say, if you stay in the house too long, you get cabin fever. But I will say that there is something that happens to you mentally, because I have a 14-year-old where when you cannot be around your friends, when something happens to you and you are isolated for months at a time, that is not the proper space where our students should be. And so we have got to know, we're educators, that this is going to have an impact on students statewide as they come back to school, reacclimate themselves to each other, to cooperation and teamwork, having to get along, having to rework their relationships. That is part of public education. And so we would do ourselves a disservice if we did not talk about mental health services, psychologists, and counselors. But I will say this before Andrew starts, our counselors are very good in our public schools, and we need to release them to do that job, and specifically that job. Trust counselors in our high schools, in our elementary schools, in our middle schools. And we know for far too long, Florida has not had the appropriate ratio between counselor and student. Andrew?
Yeah, and so the national organizations have recommendations as to how many school counselors there should be per students. I believe that number, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I believe that number is around 400 students for every school counselor. In some of our schools, it's not unheard of for a school counselor to have 1,000 kids on their roster. And the same thing is true with school psychologists and school social workers, where they're assigned to multiple schools. And the number of students in those multiple schools adds up to thousands. So I just also want to add, why is it important now? When you have kindergarten kids who are going to be coming into our schools, and maybe they're going out onto the playground and told we can't go on the playground equipment, or we need to play shadow tag, not real tag, as we socially distance and try to make sure that we minimize the spread of any viruses that may come with students to school, or they may get exposed to at school. We want to make sure those steps are in place. And for a lot of kids, it's going to be like, but why? We've got kids who haven't seen their friends in a long time, or they haven't seen their teachers. And a lot of kids, especially our elementary students, they like to hug teachers. They like the contact. That's very important. The tactile senses that students have is very important to learning and growing. And so it's going to be a little bit different. And so as we explain this to students, and as they're dealing with a lot of these feelings and emotions, having someone there that can really help them understand and work through some of those feelings is going to be vitally important. We say this all the time: kids can't learn until they know we care. And so we've got to make sure that we have all of those supports in place, and it can't just all fall on the classroom teacher.
And just as a quick follow-up, has there been a consensus, I guess, with the counselors and school psychologists that you've talked to throughout this spring semester? Has there been a demand for these services while they're studying remotely? Is this something that you've been hearing constantly throughout the state?
I'm sorry, Ms. Sabalos, you broke up and we couldn't understand you.
Oh, sorry. I guess what I'm wondering is, no.
I'm able to hear her, Fed, so I'll respond. You may be on your end, Fed. But I think, so the answer is yes. We've actually been hearing this beforehand. I mean, look, at the end of, at the outset of after Parkland, there was a call for more mental health supports and services in our schools. But even before that, you heard guidance counselors, school counselors, you heard school psychologists, school social workers who are talking about how they're not able to meet the needs of all of the students who they come across. And you've heard it from teachers as well, that it would be great if our school counselors could actually work with students when we identify that a student is struggling. And then if that school counselor can connect that child to a social worker who may be able to help the family as whole, because very often a student in crisis is a family in crisis, and making those connections are important. And our school psychologists, they almost only do testing for special education services. They don't have that opportunity to really work with kids who may be struggling with some mental health issues or some challenges at home. And so many of our kids come to school with that. So the answer is yes, we have heard that. We've heard that before the COVID crisis. We heard that obviously even before Parkland, and we continue to hear it. And now with even more and more going on in our world, with the realities that students are facing and families are facing with COVID-19, it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you.
I think we've lost Fed, but let's keep moving.
We did lose Fed. Carol Cleaver, did you have anything to add about counseling?
Well, I would just like to support what Vice President Spar just said. I'm a classroom teacher, and I work with two wonderful guidance counselors at a middle school in Escambia County, and their time is absolutely captivated, stolen by having to proctor standardized tests much of the time, having the vice president is correct. This was a problem before the pandemic. So I would say that statewide, the call has been for years. We need to be more sincere about the mental health services that we would like to provide for our students. The need is absolutely there.
And I'll add the number is 250 students per school counselor. We got the number for the National Association of Schools, 50 per student. And right now, Florida stands at 461 per student. So nearly double that.
Thank you. Sharon, do we have anyone else?
Yes, we do. John Kennedy? Anthony, would you check with John Kennedy? He doesn't seem to unmute.
Oh, sorry, that's me.
There you are. Thank you.
Thank you all. I wanted to ask you, are you concerned about the time frame that we are in right now, given that the state has not been very responsive in things like you have, as you pointed out, budget appropriations to be made somehow. There's federal money that is going to be made available to the states that can be distributed to the school districts. Right now, it's a little bit of an unknown as to how that's going to be sent, but it's going to be critical to a lot of what you outline in your recommendations when it comes to pragmatic approaches within the schools to accommodate the return of students. So I guess my question is, would you like swifter action? Because here we are on June 2nd, and school starting in August. We don't know the date right now. That also could be moved up. As some universities have been speaking about. So I wonder your thoughts on time seems to be ticking away here on a lot of these major changes that have to be made.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for your question. We certainly are, as I started my comments off, as of today, if we started school on the schedule that has already been pre-arranged, the first students back into classes in the state of Florida would start 70 days from today. That's less than 3 months. And so we are certainly wanting to work. What we have done is offered our task force, our recommendations, our guidelines, and our organization on a 24/7 basis. We are ready, willing, and to not only talk about the funds from the state, but to talk about those funds that are coming from the federal government. As Mr. Richardson outlined, there are funds that are coming from the state in almost in numbers that will reach about $1 billion. We are also pushing for the HEROES Act from the U.S. House. And so that HEROES Act is going to be important. There is another $600 million that hangs in the balance if the U.S. Senate does what the House has done already. And so, we're going to be pushing people all over the state to contact our senators and draw down more money. But we are imploring our lawmakers to get serious and let's get going so that we can open school with the same zeal and fervor that we always have and the same almost giddy anticipation for the first day of school. We don't want to go into a school a year with question marks, and people want to know how they can be safe, how they're going to stay healthy, how we're going to attune to academic success. And we all know it costs money. It costs money to do that. And so we don't shirk from that. That is a delivery that we have to have, but it is going to ensure our future, either good or bad, in the state of Florida.
If I could ask one brief follow-up too on the idea of mandatory testing in schools. This would be testing both students, young kids as well as staffers in the school. Is that something that FEA would embrace?
Right now, that's what the CDC is advocating and is recommending. And so we are going with science. And so if that is the case, again, that's going to cost money. That's going to, but there should be no dollar amount to keeping people safe and healthy. So yes, we are ready and focused to talk and figure out ways to do that. We're not only going to have to test those adults, we're going to have to test students, we're going to have to test visitors, we're going to have to test people who come with deliveries to schools. All of those things are going to be vitally important. And if we don't start those conversations right now, then what are we doing? What are we doing? And what is more important than keeping our students safe, than opening our doors in a way that we can all, one, be proud, but two, be safe and be healthy? Because everybody's life is on the line, is important as we deal with this pandemic. So yes. Sharon?
Any further questions, John?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Joe McLean? You will need to unmute yourself.
Joe, to unmute, you'll need to hit *6 or the unmute button at the bottom of your screen.
it appears that he is having some
Yes.
problems unmuting. Joe would be our final question.
All right, Joe, we'll give you about 10 more seconds. And after that, you can call our office. Okay, it seems like Joe is having some issues there. Joe, we apologize for that. First and foremost, I want to thank all of our committee members. We know that this work is more important than ever. Mr. Richardson, thank you very much. Ms. Cleaver, thank you very much. Pat Barber, thank you very much. Johanna Lopez, thank you very much. And all of our committee members, we know that they're listening in on this Zoom call, and we know that there are thousands of people across this state that are ready, willing, and help. We know that because as a part of this, we had public input, and that public input came in the form of emails, came in the form of Zoom participation, of phone calls during the task force. And we want to thank everybody who poured into the ideas of this task force to reopen Florida's public schools. And listen, I want everybody to hearken back to the first day of school, when you had the first day of school as a teacher or as a student, and it made you smile, and there was this knot in your stomach because you wanted to go and be with your friends. The summer, long hot summer was over. That is what we want for our children. There are 2.8 million children who deserve that opportunity. They deserve to have the same opportunities and that same pit in their stomach that all of us had at the first day of school. Our seniors deserve it. The class of 2021, our students who transition from 8th grade to 9th grade or from 5th grade to 6th grade, our first graders who are just coming into our public schools, they deserve an opportunity of a lifetime, and we give it to them every single year. That's what this is about. And so as we reopen our schools, let us be safe, let us be healthy, let us understand academic success, but let us not forget the single most important word: school must be fun. We have got to get this right so that our kids have an interest, so that our kids become workers, so that our kids become college students, and our college students become the next drivers of our Florida economy. Thank you all so much. We appreciate your efforts, and have a great summer, but we will be at work every single day for our students and our members. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.